So I need to tell you about what might be the weirdest mushroom story I've ever come across. And I promise you, this one gets stranger the deeper we go. Picture this, you're having dinner in Yunnan, China. You ordered some stir-fried mushroom from the market, something the locals eat all the time. The meal is delicious, and then about an hour later, you notice something absolutely bizarre happening underneath your tablecloth. You lift it up, and there are hundreds of tiny people, like 2 centimeter tall people, marching in formation like soldiers. Now you might think you're losing your mind, but here's the thing, this isn't random, this is actually quite common. In fact, 96% of people who eat this particular mushroom undercooked report seeing the exact same thing. Tiny people dancing, marching, grinning, and interacting with real objects in their environment. The mushroom is called Lanmaoa asiatica, and scientists have absolutely no idea how it works. This isn't just some local phenomenon in China. The exact same hallucination has been reported independently across multiple cultures that had zero contact with each other. In Papua New Guinea, back in the 1930s, Western explorers witnessed what they called mushroom madness. The locals called the mushroom nonda, and after eating it, people would suddenly exhibit bizarre behaviour. One elder tribesman described seeing tiny people with mushrooms around their faces, teasing him while he tried to chase them away. In the northern Philippines, indigenous communities have their own version. They call it sedesdem, and it makes them see ansitit, their word for little people. In China, it's openly sold in markets as Zhang Xiaoqing, which translates to blue in the hand. Everyone knows what it does. It's both prized for its flavour and notoriously for making you see Xiao Ren Ren, or little people. Different continents, different languages, different cultures, but the same weirdly specific hallucinations. Now think about what that means for a second. When people take psilocybin mushrooms, they report vastly different experiences. Abstract patterns, emotional insights, spiritual encounters. But this mushroom does one very particular thing. It makes you see tiny people, consistently across thousands of years and thousands of miles. Enter Colin Domnawa, a PhD student at the Natural History Museum of Utah. He's become obsessed with solving this mystery, and his journey reads like a scientific detective story. First, there's the basic problem. Until 2014, scientists didn't even know which species of mushroom this was. It had been sold in Chinese markets for decades, eaten by thousands of people, documented in hospital records, but nobody had actually done the DNA sequencing to identify it. When they finally did, they discovered it was a completely new species to science. They named it Lanmaoa asiatica, and interestingly, it's actually more closely related to porcini mushrooms, those delicious ones you put in your risotto, than to any other known hallucinogenic mushroom. This is a completely different evolutionary path to psychoactivity. So Domnawa starts investigating. He hears about the reports from Papua New Guinea and then the Philippines, and he suspects that these are all reports of the same mushroom. In 2024, he travels to the Philippines. He works with local guides, forages through forests and collects samples, and he brings them back to the lab and runs DNA sequencing. What does he find? It's the exact same species as the Chinese mushroom, Lanmaoa asiatica. The puzzle pieces are clicking together. Now here's where it gets even stranger. You know how we understand magic mushrooms pretty well. They contain psilocybin, and we know a lot about how it works, as we've mapped out the pathways, mechanisms, and the chemistry. When it comes to Lanmaoa asiatica, however, they've done a full chemical analysis, but no known psychedelic compounds whatsoever, including psilocybin, have been found. And there's something in this mushroom that reliably makes people hallucinate tiny people, and modern science has no idea what it is. It's a mystery. In 2025, with all our analytical tools and instruments, there's a molecule hiding in this mushroom that we haven't identified yet. A molecule that's been affecting human consciousness for potentially thousands of years. The researchers are currently working to isolate it. They're feeding extracts from the mushroom to mice and watching for behavioural changes. Then they fractionate the extract, test each fraction, and gradually narrow down which chemical is responsible. It's painstaking work, but the mice are showing behavioural changes, which means they're getting closer. Before you message me, unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any human trials right now. Here's another layer that blows my mind. Domnawa found references in a 3rd century Taoist text, that's almost 1800 years old, to something called a flesh spirit mushroom. The text says if you eat it raw, you can see a little person and attain transcendence immediately. Now, is that a reference to this mushroom? We can't know for certain, but the similarity is striking. Not visions, not spirits, a little person. It's very specific. So have humans been tripping on tiny people producing mushrooms throughout history and we're only just connecting the dots now? And how many other ancient references to weird mushrooms are actually describing real biochemical phenomena we haven't identified yet? Domnaoa's genomic analysis revealed something else intriguing. The closest relative of Lanmaoa asiatica grows commonly in North America. We don't have reports of it being psychoactive, but maybe that's just because no one's really tested it. No one's eaten it undercooked in the right conditions. How many other mushrooms are out there with completely unknown effects? Walking through any forest, you might pass dozens of species we've never properly investigated. And it's not just mushrooms. This story is a reminder that the natural world is still full of mysteries hiding in plain sight. We may think we have everything mapped out and catalogued and understood, but we only scientifically identified this mushroom in 2014, despite it being sold in markets and eaten by thousands of people for decades. Okay, so beyond the fact that this is just an incredibly cool story, why does this actually matter? First, let's talk about consciousness. This mushroom isn't scrambling your brain randomly. It's not making you see things. It's triggering a very specific perceptual experience. It's like there's a button in your neurology labeled tiny people, and this chemical knows exactly how to press it. What does that tell us? This mushroom has somehow found one of these pathways. And that raises fascinating questions. What other specific switches exist in our neurology that we don't know about? What other precise perceptual experiences are waiting to be unlocked? If we can understand exactly how this compound produces such a specific hallucination, we might learn something fundamental about how the brain constructs reality, about how consciousness works at its basic level. There's also a darker side to this story that's worth mentioning. Because this mushroom is sold commercially and because it can be cultivated under controlled conditions, you have a problem. When Domnaoa and his team DNA sequenced packages of dried mushrooms sold online as Lanmaoa asiatica, they found something disturbing. Multiple poisonous species mixed in with no trace of the actual mushroom the package was supposed to contain. This is the risk of traditional knowledge meeting modern commerce. Local foragers might know exactly what they're looking for, but once mushrooms get packaged, shipped, and sold through less careful channels, people can get hurt or even die. So if you're thinking about buying this mushroom online, be very careful. You don't know what you're actually buying. What I love about this story is how it challenges assumptions about what discovery means. We tend to think of scientific discovery as this linear progression. We study things, we figure them out, we move on to the next one. But the reality is messier and more interesting. Indigenous communities in Papua New Guinea have known about this effect since at least the 1930s and probably much longer. Chinese locals have been calling it the little people mushroom for who knows how long. Filipino communities have their own extensive knowledge, but it wasn't discovered by Western science until a graduate student started connecting the dots between different cultural reports and doing DNA sequencing. Right now, somewhere in a lab in Utah, researchers are getting closer to isolating this mystery compound. They're building a global database of all Lanmaoa species, and Domnaoa has already discovered 4 species previously unknown to science while doing this work. When they finally identify the active compound, and they will, it's going to open up a whole new avenue of research. So why does this story stick with me? I think it's because it represents something important about how science actually works and how much we still don't know. This isn't some rare exotic phenomenon happening in remote corners of the world. This mushroom is sold in markets, people eat it with dinner, it's been documented in hospital records, reported in news articles, and known to entire communities for decades or even centuries. And yet the active compound remains unidentified in 2025. The species itself wasn't even described scientifically until 2014. So it makes you wonder, what else are we missing? What other mysteries are hiding in local markets, growing in forests, or sitting in traditional medicine cabinets? How many more specific neurological switches are waiting to be discovered? The world is weirder than we give it credit for, and sometimes that weirdness comes in the form of a mushroom that makes you see an army of tiny people marching across your kitchen table. Reality is strange, and this common side effect is especially strange. The mystery is still unfolding, and that, to me, is what makes mushrooms, nature, and life so damn fascinating.